Hey everybody, today we are looking at Jeremiah chapters 44 to 45. We're only a few chapters away from the end. Hang in there, you can do it. So today I want to talk, just give a brief sort of summary of chapter 44 in particular. Chapter 44 is where Jeremiah is now in Egypt. You may remember that the fall of Jerusalem has occurred. Jeremiah was one of the survivors of that battle, and he was able to continue to live in the land. But then there was a kind of a civil war between a couple of different people, and Ishmael and Gedaliah, and it was not good. And so the people living in Jerusalem decided they needed to get out because this other guy, Ishmael, had killed the governor that the Babylonians had left in charge. And they asked Jeremiah for his opinion, and Jeremiah said, God is calling us to remain, to be this remnant, that God will bless us, we'll flourish. We just have to trust him and stay. But the people were too scared about Babylonian repercussion, and so dragged Jeremiah, his friend Baruch, and they all moved back down to Egypt, which we talked last week was a symbol of returning to the slavery that you were once beholden to. Returning to Egypt is not just a physical reality of returning back to the land where you were enslaved, but it really is this spiritual stronghold that you are going back. It's like going back to your life of sin, where you were, you couldn't help but save yourself. You couldn't save yourself. You were trapped by the schemes of an enemy who had power over you. And so Jeremiah gets dragged down to Egypt. In chapter 44, he now receives a word of the Lord in Egypt. And it's, again, this word of judgment against these people who have now disobeyed God's voice. And he says, you think you're gonna survive here in Egypt? You're not. Things are not going to go well for you because you've disobeyed. And the people then respond to Jeremiah, and we're like, we're not going to listen to you. Things will be fine. We'll be all right. And in fact, we're going to continue to worship this character called the Queen of Heaven. And we're going to bake cakes for her. It's going to be great. And then Jeremiah says, guess what? Here's what God says. It won't. It's not going to end well for you. It's not going to end well for the Egyptians. And you made the wrong choice. And that's kind of the end of this chapter. What's really interesting about this is they constantly come to Jeremiah to ask for a word of the Lord. And so they have some kind of belief in Yahweh, the God of Israel, that they want his blessing and his wisdom, but then they ultimately reject that wisdom. And they at the same time say, we're going to worship this other god or goddess, the Queen of Heaven. Most scholars think that this is the Canaanite god Ishtar, who gets mentioned in sort of extra biblical sources that one way that people would worship was actually to bake some sort of cake with her image on it, which is a really interesting way to worship a god, right? But it is what it is. And so these people participated in worship of this, and you can even see that the righteous King Josiah in the book of Kings has all these altars to Ishtar torn down, and he forbids the worship of the Queen of Heaven. And yet now, even some decades later, the people still are worshiping this foreign goddess. And they want her favor, and they want God's favor, and they want her favor as well. And so they're just going to sort of mix and match and pick and choose from both, and probably many more of these gods as well. The really fancy word for this is the word syncretism. Syncretism means that you sort of pick and choose the things that you want to subscribe and listen to from all kinds of different pools of thoughts or different ideologies or different sort of religions, that you're like, you know what, I really like God when he blesses us, and so I'm going to worship God at the temple. But then, the Queen of Heaven, well, she seems pretty cool. I mean, we get to bake cakes. How cool is that? So let's worship her too. And so you sort of mix and match and make your own sort of religion or value system or ideology that's a mixture of all of these things. And this was a common practice for people back in the ancient world, but it's often a very common practice for us today. Now, the gods for us today aren't named. We usually don't have kind of images of them in our house. We don't bake cakes for them, but we still pursue different gods and goddesses, don't we? Whether it's the god of power and success, or the goddess of popularity, or it could be sex, the god of sex. It could be whatever. We just call them different things. We don't have names for them anymore, but we still pursue them. And we mix and match our faith in Jesus with those things as well, that I show up on Sunday and I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to sing songs of praise to him. But then on Monday, well, I'm going to get online and look at images that I probably shouldn't have. Or I'm going to go into work and I'm going to act like this crazy narcissist so I can move up the corporate ladder, because that's what's really in my heart. I want to be successful and wealthy. Or I'm going to go to Bible study one week, but then all I'm going to talk about is how I want to renovate my house so I can keep up with the Joneses. And so we have this tendency, just like ancient people back then, to be syncretistic as well. So the lesson here is the end of chapter 44. Jeremiah has a word of condemnation for people doing that sort of thing. That God is God alone. He demands your total allegiance. And so you can't mix and match and choose what you want to follow from what God says, but then pursue these other things as well. We belong to God alone. And if we don't do that, it's not going to turn out well for us. And so the lesson for us today is to examine our hearts and ask ourselves, is God the one that we are pursuing with everything? That in all these other spaces, whether it's our relationships, our families, our workplaces, that we often look for joy or happiness or meaning or whatever, are we in all those spaces and saying, you know what, I want to live for God in these spaces? Or do we just live for God on a Sunday or a night during the week, but then the rest of the week we're kind of pursuing all these other gods and goddesses ourselves? So we really need to stop and examine ourselves and say, God, search me, try me, reveal any wicked way in me. Show me if there are other gods and goddesses that I am pursuing that are not of you, and help me to repent. This is the lesson from our readings today. It's a hard thing to do, but it's necessary. So I'll leave you with that, and we'll see you later. Bye.